hello everyone, it's Bill Griffin. Welcome to Different Take Podcast. If you like this content, please subscribe, like, share, comment. Really appreciate you watching. I've done some episodes about the war in Ukraine. I know I'm not an expert on this, but I'm going by what American media is telling us. There are some alternative voices to what the media, the corporate media and the government is telling us. But what they actually say, which is, I believe, is often untruthful, is very telling by what they will not say. At any rate, I want to break this up into three different categories. What the government and media, what they're reporting about the war, who is actually winning militarily, Ukraine or Russia, and why is the U.S. involved in this? So the media and the government say this is the good war, but they say that about every war. And we've been in a whole lot of wars since 1945. God knows how many lives have been lost and how much of our GDP has been dedicated to fighting these wars. And lives lost, not just Americans, but a lot of innocents. But the media and the parrots the government line that this is the good war. And Joe Biden said, we can't fight it though. The United States troops can't fight it. He says in an interview with Lester Holt, NBC News, this is in February of last year, prior to the outbreak of war on February 24th. He says, when asked about American troop, it's not, quote, it's not like we're dealing with a terrorist organization. We're dealing with one of the largest armies in the world, Biden said. It's a very different situation and things could go crazy quickly. He also says, quote, that's a world war. When Americans and Russians start shooting at one another, he said, we're in a very different world than we've ever been, end quote. So, but it's okay for Ukrainians to fight. Won't get crazy then. That won't get crazy at all. This is from the State Department. I couldn't figure out how to show you this very quickly, but I'll read it. It's a short thing. This is called a fact sheet from the Bureau of Political Military Affairs, www.state.gov, January 18th, 2023. It says, the United States, our allies, and our partners worldwide are united in support of Ukraine in response to Russia's premeditated, unprovoked, and unjustified war against Ukraine. As if the United States hasn't done quite a bit of that. But at any rate, we have not forgotten Russia's earlier aggression in eastern Ukraine and occupation following its unlawful seizure of Crimea in 2014. The United States reaffirms its unwavering support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders extending to its territorial waters. So that's the first paragraph. Whether you think Russia made a good decision or not, they did. That's the realistic thing that happened. But their rhetoric here is premeditated. That's hard to believe. That Russia just all of a sudden, after the Minsk agreements were ignored for 8 years, was a premeditated attack. NATO, Ukraine's talking about joining NATO, unprovoked. The United States sending military equipment, other NATO companies sending in military equipment, training Ukrainian military. In the event of a war, they don't consider that a provocation. And it's not justified. As if the United States would allow Russia to export arms to a country on our border, like Mexico. That would never happen. So the United States and government and our media present this as a foregone conclusion. It may take years, but Ukraine will prevail. And we really care about Ukraine. They claim that Russia's weak, so they're losing. But are they losing? So that gets me to the second part. Who will win this conflict militarily? This is a clip of the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley. He's speaking in Germany and discussing various issues. A short press conference. This press conference took January 20th. At the beginning of the press conference, Mark Milley, he says that the casualties to Russia are 150,000. ABC reported the same thing. Neither ABC nor Mark Milley said one word about Ukrainian casualties, even though he was asked. Completely ignored the question. Does that mean he doesn't know? He doesn't have any idea what the casualties are? Or could it be he doesn't want to report? He doesn't want to lie. Because it's probably pretty bad. Otherwise, he would tell you. This idea that the media and the governments portray Russia as weak, but at the same time, why, if that's true, why are we not willing to fight if they're so weak? If the United States, if Poland could send troops in if they thought Russia was weak. I don't think they think that at all. So in this clip that I'm going to play for you, imagine he's talking about United States troops when he talks about how the war is going. Just replace or put United States troops alongside Ukrainian troops and see what you think. If you have a different opinion of whether they're winning or not. And by that I mean the Ukrainians, whether they're winning or not. If you put the U.S. troops alongside them, and just imagine that he would say the same things about American troops that he says about Ukrainian troops.
President Biden, President Zelensky, and most of the leaders of Europe have said that this war is likely to end in a negotiation. And from a military standpoint, this is a very, very difficult fight. This fight stretches all the way from right now, so the front line goes from all the way from Kharkiv down to Kherson, and there's significant fighting ongoing, and it's more or less a static front line right this minute, with the exception of Bakhmut and Soledar, where there's significant offensive action going on really from both sides. The distance, that for the United States, that's about from, I guess, Washington, D.C. to Atlanta. So that is a significant amount of territory. And in that territory are still remaining a lot of Russian forces in Russian-occupied Ukraine. So from a military standpoint, I still maintain that for this year, it would be very, very difficult to militarily eject the Russian forces from every inch of Ukrainian-occupied or Russian-occupied Ukraine. That doesn't mean it can't happen, doesn't mean it won't happen, but it'd be very, very difficult. I think what can happen...
So he says it's a very, very difficult fight, that it's a static front line, and that he can't say any way the Ukrainians will prevail in removing the Russians from Ukrainian territory this year. And if he doesn't think it'll happen this year, how does he think it's going to happen next year? The Ukrainian army is, my understanding, is that they're much smaller than the Russian army. He doesn't tell you this. According to some people you can look up, Colonel Douglas McGregor and Scott Ritter say that they're resorting to, and there's some other people that report this as well. They're resorting to enlist older men that are probably shouldn't be fighting a war, and young boys as young as 16 years old. There's also claims that Russia has as many as 650,000 troops. The U.S. claimed that Russia will not mount an offensive until the spring. That's impossible. But yet, others say that it can. I'm just going by what the United States government is saying. He just said that he doesn't see ejecting Ukraine by the end of the year. So if Ukraine is losing as many casualties as Russia is, then there's not going to be much of a military by the end of this year. The numbers don't add up. There's also been a lot of turnover in the Ukrainian government. Daily Wire reports today, January 24th, 23, headline, Ukraine dogged by corruption allegations sees largest government shakeup since war began. A group of top Ukrainian officials, including top military leader, left the government on Tuesday as President Volodymyr Zelensky's administration grapples with allegations of fraud and corruption. So, who's winning this military conflict? The United States government claims that this is all, there is no corruption. We can account for the equipment that we're sending over there, which would mean we have to have Americans on the ground. There's also training and maintenance of this massive amount of equipment, $100 billion pledged. But yet you have this turmoil in this report that it's got to do with allegations of fraud and corruption. Some of the department, according to the Daily Wire, further, some of the departures and resignations included the deputy head of Ukraine's presidential office, deputy defense minister, and deputy prosecutor. There's also another deputy defense minister that resigned. Or pardon me, last week a top advisor resigned, Alexei Arestovich, I believe is how you say it. And this top advisor has been interviewed since he left. He's probably not in the country, or he's got to be in hiding for what he apparently said. Podcast channel Redacted reported, and there's video of him saying he's translated as saying Ukraine cannot win the war. But you set that all aside, what the United States government is saying does not sound good. They just announced today that they're sending tanks. Germans sending tanks. They're sending these tanks, which amount to, I think it's 80 tanks or something like less than 100 tanks. According to Colonel McGregor and Scott Ritter, the Russians are about to unleash 2,000 tanks. This just does not sound as if Ukraine will win, but winning for the United States government, these guys may be just destroying Ukraine and just doing whatever they can to destabilize and damage Russia. So the third thing I want to talk about is, well, why are we doing this? Why is the United States doing this? Again, I found this article on an op-ed in the Washington Post. It doesn't really matter where it came from. This line is the same, and it goes like this. We have to protect Ukraine. Actually, we have to hurt Russia, but the line is we have to protect the borders of Ukraine because this will encourage other countries to do the same thing that Russia's doing. China is likely to move against Taiwan. In fact, military opportunism could soon overtake world affairs. Iran could attack Israel. North Korea could go on the offensive. So this is the line that these things could happen. Well, a lot of things could happen, but the four scenarios that we're talking about here, or the three scenarios, have nothing to do with the fourth scenario, which is Russia and Ukraine. The United States has had a relationship with Taiwan since Taiwan became a country. The same thing with Israel. The United States was instrumental in establishing Israel. The United States was instrumental in establishing South Korea. Now, whether you think that's a good idea to protect or defend South Korea and Taiwan, Israel, that's a whole different matter, but that has nothing to do with Ukraine, because Ukraine was actually part of Russia until 1954, and in 1991 the Soviet Union broke apart and the West broke their pledge to not extend NATO any farther east, and they broke that. This is an article that was written published prior to the Russia-Ukraine war that started February 24th of 2022. Headline, this is the Cato Institute, March 9, 2021. Since when did Ukraine become an important U.S. ally? The United States are flirting with crossing a bright red line that risks confrontation with a nuclear-armed power. This is an excerpt from that op-ed. I think this explains a good reason why the United States shouldn't be involved. It says, until the dissolution of the Soviet Union at the end of 1991, Ukraine was nothing more than a constituent part of that totalitarian state. No one ever argued at the time that Ukraine was a vital or even a pertinent security interest of the United States. However, American officials now insist that supporting Ukraine against a weakened, non-communist Russia does constitute such an interest. In a New York Times op-ed, William Taylor, who served as interim United States ambassador to Ukraine in 2019, elevated the country's importance to stratospheric levels. Quote, Ukraine is defending itself and the West against Russian attack. If Ukraine succeeds, we succeed. The relationship between the United States and Ukraine is key to our national security. End quote. Indeed, he insisted in the, quote, the contest between democracies and autocracies, the contest between freedom and unfreedom, Ukraine is the front line. So this idea that we have to protect Ukraine because we want to respect their democracy and freedom, it's not really true. But at any rate, that's not what they're after. What they're after, the government, and these the elites in Washington, they want to keep the war machine going. That's always a good thing. And they're out to destabilize Russia. It has nothing to do with Ukraine. If we really thought Russia was weak, these folks would want troops there. They want to support Ukraine with air power. They won't do that because they know it's not true. That op-ed was written by Ted Galen Carpenter, and I think it explains pretty well what's changed. It asks the question. And the media doesn't ask this question. And it's a pertinent question. Why? How does this help the United States at all? For hundreds of thousands of, presumably many more than maybe 200,000 Ukrainian casualties, and maybe many, many more to come, how does that help the United States? It seems to me we're going to be in a worse position than we were to start with. It also sounds like utter madness to have that lack of concern for human life. And that can't bring much comfort to our allies, because we're sending these Ukrainians, if they do not, if they don't achieve their objective, and Mark Milley says it's going to be this year, how many artillery rounds are they going to have to take for the remainder of the year? And will there be an offensive by Russia? And what does that entail? It sounds to me as if Ukraine cannot win this war. And these gentlemen that I've referred to, Colonel Douglas McGregor and Scott Ritter, you can look them up. They both say it's game, set, and match. It's inevitable that the Ukrainian military will be annihilated. And that is, it just sounds like a shameful, sorry state our country is when we elect leaders and have leaders that have this lack of regard for human life. I want to end with another clip from Mark Milley. This is, again, press conference he had in Germany on January 20th. The reverse is true. Ukraine could end the war. It's also very true that, if it's as bad as he says it is for Russia, how bad is it for Ukraine? And they want them to suffer through another year of this war. That's pretty amazing that our government, and that this gentleman describes this in such a, he describes the Ukrainian troops in a much more, or the Ukrainian fight in a much more cavalier way than he would describe the American troops. It would be a total disaster for American troops if this happened to American troops, what has happened to the Ukrainian troops, or the Ukrainian military. If they suffered the loss of this territory and the static lines and the fact that he doesn't see any way that they can eject the Russian military by the end of this year, that would be a total debacle for the United States. And I'm surprised people don't see this, but hopefully people are coming around to something a little more reasonable. And hopefully it's an end somehow, but there doesn't look to be any end in sight. And what in there is in sight probably means the complete destruction of a country that the United States supposedly wanted to help. So that's my episode for today. I hope you got something out of it. Please subscribe, like, share, comment if you like the content. Thanks for watching.